Hello and welcome to episode 6 of My Thoughts. So, thought we were going to get into a number of other things this week, but it turns out that people in positions of power had other things to do and thus create stuff for me to talk about. So where to begin? Well, the first thing, it appears that last week's episode I forgot to mention that after that in 1619, after the Jamestown villagers confiscated the slaves from the Portuguese slave ship, that they actually set them free. They set them up with tools and land so that they could be free citizens of the new colony. I have no idea why they didn't help them go home, but, seemed like that would have been an idea. But, so, some of the things for this lovely week have been the idea stated, planned by the new Secretary of Defense to fight white supremacy and extremism in the military. And some of the ideas to do this are screening everyone's comments on any form of social media from any point in their life to determine if there may be clues to something that is currently politically unacceptable. Yeah, I can see how this could go a lot of wrong ways. What exactly do they mean by extremism? I mean, the white supremacy part's pretty evident. I mean, seriously, it may be 2021, but there are people who actually still have this crazy idea that the amount of melatonin in your skin has something to do with your value. And no, that was not some little nudgy thought. That was just a actual itch on the ear. Nothing to be read into. And then, what kind of little clues? Did somebody perhaps listen to punk music in their teenage years, and some punk music band from London had a logo with a combat boot on the cover of their album that was somehow associated with a right-wing, white Anglo political movement? It's like, where do you cut the line off? And another problem is that the way that the articles are being written about this is what the military needs to do. Articles being written by people who are not in the military, so one would hope that the military already has some rules, which they have pointed out. AP, Reuters, an organization or a agency called Military Times have all pointed out that there are already military regulations that explicitly prohibit any association with extremist organizations or affiliations of any type. By specifying white supremacy, they don't even put the comma, white supremacist and extremist activities, aren't you kind of, by stating the sentence that way, isn't it kind of targeting one specific group? And mightn't that make them feel defensive? Honestly, I'm talking about it because I look like the kind of person that this sentence sounds like it would be targeting. And what do I have to do to defend what would I have to do to defend myself against these kind of allegations? Well, here's a funny thought from the world of sociology and social responsibility. Attempting to defend oneself against allegations of white supremacy indicates a complicitness with passive acceptance of white supremacy. So basically, if someone accuses you and you argue against them, then you are defending the status quo, which allows the bad thing to exist. That seems a little unfair, and frankly, telling that to a bunch of 20-year-olds with rifles, seems like that might not be the best way to go about it. However, that does not in any way indicate a idea of leaving it alone, because let's face it, the military teaches tactical operations for invasion and occupation of hostilely held territory. So, and evidence shows that extremist organizations, white supremacist and gang-related, often actively encourage their young members in the 18, 19, 20-year-old range to join the military in order to explicitly get tactical training of a military level so that they can return to these organizations. That sounds like a worse idea than sitting a bunch of soldiers down and saying, hey, let's have a talk about this. So I would definitely encourage our Congress and our civilian leadership of the military to choose their words so as to make these young people feel inclusive against the specific threat, and not that they may be targeted as possibly being that threat. Then on top of that, or rather following that, we have Representative Sheila Jackson Lee from Houston, Texas, wanting to push a bill through Congress that would require anyone who owns a gun, wants to own a gun, or wants to buy ammunition for a gun to undergo psychological screening to determine if they are safe enough to be trusted. Now, I was under the impression that Texas is let's just say, they have a reputation for open carry. It's like, seriously, you want to take how did she get elected in a state where people think nothing about walking around with a gun on their hip for everyone to see? Texas is like one of the most pro Second Amendment states in the world. Forget the country, in the world. And yet she got elected? Okay, so let's look into this a little bit further. So you would have to have a psych eval, 4 references, assuming you're married, because it says your spouse, any ex-spouse, a previous significant other, and 2 other family members. So a total of 4 references, a psychological evaluation, and an $800 processing fee just to get a license to purchase them. And then you would have to re-register each year. Now, there's another problem that I have with this, and it strikes me as odd that Sheila Jackson Lee is African American, because African Americans have a higher percentage of financially challenged individuals. So not only is this bill just straight up in contravention of the U.S. Constitution, it also targets people who have lower capital, which would then make minorities and marginalized groups, specifically African American groups, one of the most heavily targeted to deny them the ability to defend themselves. Now, a person can argue you don't need a firearm to defend yourself. Approximately 3 years ago, there was a news headline of a woman in Portland, Oregon, who stopped a home invasion with a samurai sword. And as if that wasn't enough, the intruder was armed with a firearm. She took a gun away from a invader with a sword. I mean, I'm sorry, laws of physics say say that a person can shoot someone from a greater distance than they can stab them with a sword. But apparently in this lady's apartment, nope. So she disarmed the intruder and held him at bay until the police arrived and arrested him. So a person can argue you don't need a gun per se. Okay, well, given that amongst the other things involving the Second Amendment, it doesn't say anything about hunting or home defense. It's the right of the people to own and bear arms shall not be infringed in order to provide for a common defense. Okay, yes, I paraphrased that. Don't hate on me, okay? Come on, cut a brother a break. Now, there is another article in the U.S. Constitution that says something to the effect of, in the event that the U.S. government extends its overreach to a point of becoming a tyrannical agency, that the people have not only the right but the responsibility to oppose that federal government, even in an armed capacity. So the self-defense is not only against possible home invasion, but also potentially against the government itself. To which people can argue, well, how would you fight the U.S. military? The one that way back at the beginning we talked about being reviewed, being purged of extremists. And unfortunately, there are some more conspiratorially minded people or news commentators who are trying to really stir the pot of drama, pointing out that it could be viewed as purging the military of anyone not loyal to the current administration. So Darth Vader and his stormtroopers marching into some random American town, would the random Americans with their privately owned firearms be able to fight back? Well, first of all, would those stormtroopers actually look at their fellow American citizens and follow these orders that sound like they would violate the law anyway? Probably not. So, yeah, it's highly suspect, but it's not uncommon. The worst mass shooting and school shooting in U.S. history did not occur in the 20th century. It was at a place called Wounded Knee, where the U.S. cavalry was sent to a Native American camp. Okay, so it was an Indian reservation, and the people had firearms, and they were told, hey, you're the wrong color, the wrong ethnicity. Come on, this is the 1800s. It's like the 1880s. It's like, hey, we've got a problem with Geronimo shooting soldiers, so we're going to go over here where these women and children and old people are and tell them that they have to give up stuff. The tribal village said that didn't sound right, so the U.S. cavalry slaughtered them. Yeah, the U.S. government was used to murder U.S. citizens at a school because they were the wrong color. Okay? We see that's another one of those stains on American history that we do not want repeated. Let's see what other things they've done. Here in American history, we like to talk about the Little Rock Nine. It was a move to integrate schools in the 1950s. Yeah, they wanted to get rid of that segregation by race. So the President of the United States ordered the U.S. military to escort children to a school in Little Rock, Arkansas, where they forced American citizens at gunpoint to change their local laws and to accept the rule of the federal government. Then we've got Ruby Ridge, Branch Davidian in Waco, Texas, New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina. The U.S. government has no problem using armed forces to suppress American citizens, even if there is no hostility. That's why we're supposed to vote for people who will reflect what our values. Do we always get a chance? Yeah, sometimes, yes, we have to choose between the less of two evils. But you pick the person that you think will most likely reflect what is best for your family. And we're not even talking about allegations of voter fraud, so don't anybody get out of whack on that one. But we can only vote for who is running. So if the Republican Party runs one person and the Democrat Party runs one person, and we don't like either of those people, then what do? Well, you get active and you convince one of those parties to pick somebody that you do like. So we're going to wrap it up at that point. Everybody have a great week, and God bless America.